Hello, Cohort 30. Today we're going to be talking about personality and leadership. Personality is often viewed as the way a person thinks, the way they feel, and the way they behave when they're interacting with others. It is often thought of as a combination of what we inherit and what makes up who we are, and also what is nurtured in us through our family and culture. I want to look at leadership through the lens of the 5-factor model of personality and examine what current literature suggests about the connection. The 5-factor model of personality is often called the Big Five. It is conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness to experience, and extroversion. It is the most widely used taxonomy of personality in psychology. I chose the Big 5-factor model because I believe it to be one of the most accurate psychometric schemas we have to understand ourselves and our relationships, and in turn, how we lead. So let's go ahead and dive into the Big Five, looking at the concepts and constructs. We're going to break it down. We're also going to see how they're defined and talk a little bit about how they are measured. So looking at this diagram, we can see that we have first conscientiousness. It's a propensity to be orderly, self-disciplined, and also to follow rules and structures. Facets for this include being industrious and also orderliness. Next, we have agreeableness. This is a warm and supportive, sometimes even thought as gregarious, reaching out people and being a people pleaser. See, the facets are politeness and compassion. Neuroticism is a tendency to experience anxiety, negative emotions, and worry versus calm and resilience. You can see the facets there are volatility and withdrawal. Next, we have openness. This is often thought as an openness to experience, interest in ideas and values. The facets are intellect, not to be confused with IQ, but the quest for knowledge, and then also creativity. Then next we have extroversion. This can be thought of as ambitious, talkative, outgoing, and you can see the facets there are enthusiasm and assertiveness. So each one of these traits are on a spectrum. So for example, someone may score highly agreeable, but also low on neuroticism, meaning that they're pretty calm. And how each one is placed combined with the other traits then gives insight into a person's personality. For example, two people may be highly ranked in openness, particularly in creativity. And one person may be highly extroverted and agreeable, yet less conscientious, resembling the quintessential rock star. In contrast, someone scoring the same level of openness but much more introverted and disagreeable may be the troubled artist. So how does personality play into leadership? Well, if who we are is how we lead, then our personality is an insight into our effectiveness as a leader, as well as the leadership style we will gravitate. It is usually established that conscientiousness is one of the strongest predictors of job performance. This would lead us to believe that it is also a crucial trait in leadership, or at least in being selected as a leader. We might also predict that being low in neuroticism is essential for a leader to show calmness in the face of adversity and conflict, to keep their head when others do not know what to do and are falling and asking questions. Another useful angle is to look at leadership behaviors themselves through a Big Five-shaped lens. So first, let's look at a study that was done by Langford, Douglas, and Parks, where they proposed and organized 22 specific leader behaviors into 5 higher-order factors, and then they aligned them with the personality. So as we can see here in their model, that they went ahead and aligned each one of these. They did this using a 360-degree data across industries. And for example, they found that the innovate factor, which includes intellectual stimulation, showed a positive association with the raters' judgments of leaders, especially around openness. As we go through this, you can see that they also aligned the leadership traits directly with the Big Five traits. So you have voice is extroversion, organize is conscientiousness, innovate is openness, connect is agreeableness, and then enjoy is emotional stability, also known as neuroticism. So now that we've looked at it through a broad lens of leadership and understand a little bit about aligning it with good traits that we see in leaders, let's tune in and look more closely at transformational leadership. And we know that transformational leadership, the traits are idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. So as I was thinking about this, I first made a few predictions. For example, a personality high in extroversion would be beneficial when considering influence and motivation. I also suspect that being high in openness would be very critical for success in the intellectual stimulation. Maybe some of this too will help if we look at this in combination with two transformational leaders. Now, as we look at this diagram, keep in mind that this is not a clinical assessment, just based off an illustrative purposes. Let's go ahead and dive into this a little bit by looking at two transformational leaders who have some similarities, but yet also some differences. So Jacinda Ardern was formerly the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and she was there during the time of COVID and did an impressive job of leading the country through lockdowns, through the various changing policies and procedures. And as we can see, she was very much a transformational leader through this time, and they had great success in this. You also can tell that she was somebody that's highly conscientious. She wanted to stay within the rules and the policies and lead others to do that as well. As we look also at Elon Musk may not be as highly conscientious, but we can definitely see that he inspires, he motivates, he does stimulate this intellectualism, and he passes this off to his teams. Now, one can also look at this and see that Jacinda Ardern probably falls more into also an authentic leader than, say, Elon Musk. And it's interesting to note some of the literature points out that oftentimes females are seen more as transformational leaders than their male counterparts. We also can see that Elon Musk falls into very much the idea too of his industriousness, which can be in conscientious but not in the same as politeness, or maybe it would be better to say he's not as high in agreeableness. But by looking at these two and comparing that, we start to see that there are some of these personality things that overlap. And even though people may not be exactly alike, they may have some of these similar personality traits that impact their leadership. So if we look at some of the actual research in 5-factor model of personality and transformational leadership by Judge and Bono, this was kind of a foundational study. And in their findings, they went to leaders drawn from 14 samples and 200 plus organizations. The authors found that extroversion and agreeableness consistently predict transformational leadership. So that reinforces some of the intuition that you might have had in that. Openness correlated with transformational leadership, but it adds little, they said, once the traits are controlled. And we'll talk a little more about that too, because I think that is very much probably not to be understated still at this point. And then also they said neuroticism and conscientiousness showed no reliable link in the study they did. Well, extending this line of query, Shea and Weber did this in China. And so they looked at a Chinese sample and a different culture to conduct a cross-cultural test of 5-factor model and transformational leadership. And in this context, they found that extroversion is negatively related to transformational leadership. They argued that cultural things like high uncertainty avoidance, connectivism, and cultural tightness may have came into play into this. I think what's really important to know is that it's cultural related at times. Additionally, the authors report a negative association between neuroticism and transformational leadership. Again, this is something that you would expect, but we did not see it very clearly in the previous research article. But you would expect that if you're not able to be calm and keep your anxiety in check, that it would be difficult to lead. So taken together, these results suggest that both regional culture and the organizational culture conditions, they get involved in the effectiveness of these personality traits within the TL framework. So in practice, if educators at a given system tend to value conscientiousness and agreeableness, They may elevate these traits in the leader they select. And moreover, because extroversion and agreeableness often confer advantages in interview and selection process, candidates high on these traits may be disproportionately chosen, even if the traits are most predictive of leadership effectiveness vary by culture. And so we see in Asian culture, they didn't value as much the extroversion as we might in our culture. Also, further studies may gain more insights by looking at the facet level than just staying on a composite level. So, for example, in conscientiousness, the facet of industrious may be more important than the facet of orderliness, or following the structure. Think of Elon Musk, whose public persona is one of relentless drive over following order. This is an example illustrating how a facet focus clarifies which elements of a broad trait matter most. So, in conclusion, looking at this, I think personality does play an important role in leadership, and this may be mostly in the self-reflection of the leader. Knowing our propensities and our predilections can help us navigate the competencies of a leader. My personality is one that is probably middle range of extroversion. Well, I've tested at middle range, and also highly agreeable. My agreeableness level has been challenging in the past when dealing with conflicts and relying heavily on strategies of ignoring and avoiding the conflicts. But I've developed my conflict management skills by also being aware of this and realizing through conscientiousness that being clear is kind, and that being polite can also just be placating and ineffective. So I think leadership is a combination of who we are. Who we are is the actions we take on a regular basis. We become what we do. Our personality may help identify potential leadership traits, but context and development matter, and how we develop ourselves brings us to good leadership. And I think it's also interesting to note here one final caution. Some dark personality of traits can mimic transformational signals. Charisma, which is something that's often thought about in transformational leaders, and would align to being highly agreeable and also extroversion. If it's not aligned with being highly conscientious and moral content, they can end up being a pseudo-transformational leader, corroding the trust and the ethics and breaking down the organization over time. But that's a topic for a whole nother discussion. If you want to find out more about how you place on the Big 5 personality traits, go to understandmyself.com. After taking the psychometric assessment, you'll be provided with a comprehensive analysis with concrete examples that you can apply to your relationships and also to your leadership. From there, it'll help you go into journaling and self-reflection to assist in your development. Thank you, Cohort 30, and I look forward to keep talking to you about personality and leadership.